Baba appeared to be sleeping, and that afforded Robert the chance to look closely at the yogi. He had on a white turban and a long Indian shirt or kurta that came down to his knees, with matching gray pajama-like pants. The more Robert stared at him, the more uncomfortable he became. With a dark turn of mind, Robert wondered what his ransom value might be if he was kidnapped. He figured that both his aunt and uncle had some money in stock squirreled away. His aunt had her apartment on Riverside Drive and her salary with New York Magazine, while his uncle had his teaching job at Columbia. "I'm probably worth $1 million, Robert said to himself as the train came to one of its many stops. As the doors opened, Robert found himself opposite a nearly naked sadhu sitting on a station bench, his eyes closed in meditation. The man's face and beard were all dyed yellow, with a bright red square painted on his forehead. For a few moments, Robert just stared at the sadhu. Whatever he had gotten into, he couldn't get off now, Robert figured. He had to trust Baba, and with that unsettling thought, he wadded his Columbia sweatshirt against the window and went to sleep. Robert awoke, finding the morning sun streaming through the smeary windows of the train. At the next stop, he and Baba got off as the train was being serviced. Robert strolled through the station, buying bananas, sodas, and crackers. "Want some?" Robert asked as they returned to their seats. "Not now," came the yogi's curt reply. With that, Baba began silently chanting from a small prayer book. When he was done, he reached for one of Robert's bananas. Slowly he ate one, then another, and still another. "Jesus," Robert muttered to himself, "doesn't this guy have any manners?" After finishing, Baba turned to Robert. "Now, what is your good name?" he asked. "I'm Robert Marty," he answered, wondering what kind of provincial he had hooked up with. "Robert, I am Baba," the yogi replied, shaking his hand. "Are you ready for your first lesson?" Robert shrugged his shoulders. "First is to smile. If God is the doer, then why are you so worried? And if he is the giver, then why are you so angry that I took some of his bananas?" While Robert tried to think of a good response, Baba began chatting with a family sitting across from them. The white-bearded father listened intently, bobbing his head in the peculiar Indian way. After a few minutes, he stood up with a broad grin on his face. "Good, American, good, good," he exclaimed, patting Robert on the shoulder. "Pardon?" Robert asked. "Very good, most good, very, very," he added. Then the man sighed deeply and began emptying everything out of his pockets onto Robert's lap. Rupees, beads, a little statue of Ganesha, the elephant god. "Rama, Rama, Rama," the man chanted as he now began taking out oranges, books, and a gray shawl from his shoulder bag, placing them all before Robert. Robert shot a perplexed look toward Baba, but the yogi's expression was inscrutable. After he had emptied his shoulder bag, he began calling out to the others in the car. Soon they were coming over to him and reverently placing things in Robert's lap. Through it all, the old man kept yammering on until finally his runny-nosed grandson dropped a Krishna comic book before Robert. After that, the old man seemed to run out of steam, dropping back into his seat. Robert stared at the pyramid of goods on his lap, shaking his head. "What's going on?" he asked the yogi. "They are so happy that you have found your spiritual teacher," Baba replied, with a chuckle. A little while later, they arrived in Dehradun, and from there, they took a taxi to Rishikesh. At first, Robert thought that this would be just another Indian town, dirty, dilapidated, with electricity lines crowding the skyline. But as they crossed over the Ganges on a narrow bridge, he saw that Rishikesh was totally different. On the hillside facing him were multi-storied temples and monasteries, with orange-robed monks going about their business. That's when Robert's voluminous knowledge of the 60s kicked in, and he remembered. Rishikesh. The Beatles, Mia Farrow, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the beginning of the Ganges, sacred place of yogis. When they got to the other side of the Ganges, Baba hired a horse-drawn tonga to take them up into the hills above the river. After a few switchbacks, Baba told the driver to stop. "Pay him," Baba told Robert, and began walking quickly away from the road. After Robert had paid the man, he went looking for Baba. The yogi was standing in front of a weather-beaten door of a large, boarded-up home. After a few moments, Baba pulled out a key and unlocked the rusted padlock. The door creaked open, showing a concrete floor that was littered with dust, leaves, and dead bugs. Suddenly, Baba bowed down, his forehead pressing against the threshold. For the longest time, he remained in that position. Robert stared down at him, feeling both moved and uneasy. Finally, Baba stood up. "Who lived here?" Robert asked, tentatively. "A great man," Baba replied. "Who?" Robert persisted. "My teacher," Baba replied, his words unexpectedly coming out as a whisper. The yogi then stepped over the threshold and walked to the back of the room. "This is where he would sit," Baba said, pointing to a place by the wall. "And this is where I would," Baba said, pointing to where Robert was now standing. "His words were law." Baba walked back toward the doorway. "You see that tree over there?" Baba asked, pointing to a large tree with massive branches. Robert nodded. "Once he told me to climb it and that I could come down when he returned. But he didn't come. Not the first day, or the second. I knew that he was testing my grit, so I stayed up there. I ate the leaves and learned that at night water would collect where the branches met the trunk. But sleeping was tricky. If I fell, it was 16 feet down, so I slept straddling the branch. Then," Baba said, chuckling at the memory, "on the third day he returned, all smiles. 'Did I forget you?' 'Well, come on down now,' he said. I lowered myself down. It felt strange to be on solid ground again. 'You will be master one day,' he told me. 'Good, then I'll put you up there for 3 days,' I teased, and we both had a good laugh." After saying that, Baba sighed. "Let's clean up now." For the rest of the afternoon, they went about making his teacher's place livable again. After dusk, Baba made a bright fire and cooked some rice and vegetables that they had gotten in town. Then, after they ate the food, they rinsed their plates in a nearby stream. After that, Baba made a fire outside, and then took off his turban, letting his long black and gray hair cascade down to the small of his back. Robert gazed at him through the rising smoke and felt he was not just in another country, but in another world. And yet, as he gazed at the yogi, Robert could feel that he was more relaxed than he had been in months. He wasn't sure if he believed in reincarnation, but everything around him seemed oddly familiar and reassuring. After a while, Baba stood up and stretched his arms way above his head. Then he extinguished the fire. "This ashram is so full of good memories. Perhaps you will have some," he said, looking down at Robert. "Now, let us go for some sleep." And with that, Baba took out his blanket and sheepskin, setting his bed right where his teacher would sit.